Welcome everyone. We're gonna get this thing going in just a few moments. Thank you all for joining us today. So I just want to say it's so great to see so many people here for the Maps and Zendo Project EntheoGeneration talk. We're so excited to have all of you joining us for today's session, Community as a Sacrament. Joining me are Tony Moss and Audri Scott Williams. Audri will be leading our invocation today. Audri, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to just give us all a few seconds just to enter into the silence and just open our hearts, breathing in this opportunity for us to once again come together as community. I want to recognize the directions from which we are greatly influenced. I'd like to start. I am an Eastern Band Cherokee. So I would like to begin with recognizing the East and calling forward the rising sun, the birthing energy that brings us into this moment and takes us beyond. What visions are we holding now? And where is it that we want to plant good seeds so that when we go into the southern door, we're going into that place of great mystery, where the seeds that we're sowing, the visions that we're holding are able to be acted upon and all that is needed to guide us forward. And on this journey, we go forward to the West. And through the Western door, we access that knowledge, that great book of knowledge that's been written by our ancestors. We get to review that, we get to call on that, we get to connect with that as we journey now to the North. The space of wisdom, where we get to commune with our elders and with nature to get answers to those questions that we're living in. And to the center, that great dark hole, if you will, where if we could shine our light, we would but see the roots of all that is here on planet Earth connected in one symbiotic, beautiful heart. And to the above, all that comes forward from our cosmos that unites us not just with what's here in this dimension, but takes us beyond. Again, another level of connection and knowing of inspiration and possibility. Recognizing in us this journey and in all of life this journey. And so being in that space, we are open to receive and to be. And for this, I do give thanks. Aho, amen, and ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Yeah, well, once again, thank you all for being here. We want to express some gratitude for all of you in attendance today, as well as those of you watching this recording as a play on whether it's Zoom or Facebook or YouTube. These conversations would not be possible without your participation. We also want to honor all that came before us, all the indigenous people who have historical roots with plant medicines and have long recognized their healing potential. Also like to recognize the incredible men and women, and again, especially the women in these times that maybe are not getting the same recognition as the men in these fields pioneering psychedelic medicine. Also want to give big gratitude for all the pioneers of psychedelic research and therapy, all the healthcare providers who devote their lives to helping people find healing and care. And the psychedelic field would not be where it is today without all of this dedication. And for it, we are incredibly grateful to you all. So before we really dive into this, I just want to cover a quick few logistics. So the first is to remind everyone these sessions will be recorded and available afterwards. They're all free, so please share with your friends if you can get them to join us. Here in Zoom, we do have the option for Q&A. That is we're going to do our best to monitor that on YouTube Live and Facebook, but there might be a little bit of delay. So here, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or here in Zoom, we want to encourage everyone to use the chat area to converse. This is about community. We encourage you to build your community here. We've seen folks in these other webinars at MAPS share their LinkedIn profile, whatever feels appropriate, it's your call. But what we're asking is that this be a safe space for open and honest dialogue. So please bring your most diplomatic, kind, and compassionate language to the Zoom chat. We encourage any kind of conflict of opinion to be approached from a place of curiosity and mutual respect. So we also have moderators who are monitoring the chat. They'll step in as necessary to remind us to have respectful conversations. We do not tolerate any bullying, harassment, or trolling of any kind. So let's bring our best selves forward to these conversations. And if you have questions for any of us, please post them in the Q&A function. Questions posed in the chat may not be considered because they're easily lost on the thread. And finally, MAPS cannot provide any legal, medical, or mental health advice, nor do we advise on the use of any prohibited substance. So that being said, we're going to do things a little bit different. Usually we have one of our MAPS staff introduce these fine human beings, but I recognize there's a different story that we would like to share and tell with you. If you're interested, any of our bios are available on EntheoGeneration.community, but I would like us to introduce ourselves to you, our extended community, through our journey of our coming up, our bios, our adventures and our stories from community as that evolved from our childhood to where we sit today. So Audri or Tony, are either of you feeling like you want to be the one to lead us off and model this?
Well, since Audrey was kind enough to do the invocation, I'll start.
Thanks, Tony.
I definitely grew up without a sense of community as I now understand it, but that's partly because we had a very tight-knit family growing up. My first sense of community came from discovering the drama club in high school, because suddenly I was with a whole group of people that like understood me. And they were just far enough outside of mainstream anything that it was just very appealing to me. So just being in an artistic community of people with those shared values lasted, quite honestly, right up until I left a professional musical theater career. And that's because I got introduced to ayahuasca and LSD, both accidentally in the same year, right? Yeah, the LSD was, I had the dreaded, you should never dose people experience, but in my case, it worked out to be like a beautiful juncture in my life. And the ayahuasca was accidental in the sense that I didn't know what it was, like a lot of people. A friend invited me to an ayahuasca journey and I said, "Aya what?" And he kind of gave me a sense of what it was, so I went, and that was a huge juncture. And relatively speaking, although the community that I actually feel connected to has shifted over the years, that the plant medicine psychedelic community became my first real sense of what community was, because that led into meeting indigenous people and studying with them. And yeah, so I got a broader sense of that. So that, you know, in addition to being a performing and recording artist, I am mostly now seen as a very enthusiastic advocate for the decriminalization of all plant medicines. Yeah.
Nice.
Now the pressure's on, Audrey.
Thank you, Tony and Ryan. This is, I think the older you get, the harder it is to wrap it up in a little bitty
Sure is.
session, isn't it?
Well, then, Audrey, don't feel any pressure to make it little or bitty.
Oh, I think I'll do
time.
it. I actually grew up very much aware of community. I would say I grew up in the South, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and my parents were very active in the civil rights movement. As I said in the beginning, my heritage is Cherokee, my heritage is African, my heritage is Scottish. So all of those seeds are within me. But I grew up in Fayetteville at the time of the Civil Rights Movement. I was actually about 8 years old. And so our home was a major area, and my father owned a cafe not too far from where we lived. So a lot of the organizing happened at the cafe. It happened at our home. I was always in the midst. I was probably the most annoying little element there. And anyway, when there was a march, I really got to get this sense of community in that there was a march to the marketplace, which was from our house there in the middle of town, where we had ancestors who were sold there. But there was a large community march that was led by the students at Fayetteville State University. And we had everyone coming back to our house at the end with a cookout. And I'm taking some time here because this really launches the future of who I am, aspect of myself. So that night, after being tear gassed and dogs turned on them, all kinds of things beaten, everyone came back to our house and we had a cookout going all night long. And the one thing that stood out for me as a little 8-year-old, one was being very concerned about teasing everybody, thinking they were eating chicken. Our family, as I said, had a restaurant, so we just about depleted all the food there for everyone except a box of frog legs. So at the end, they were frying the frog legs and giving them out, and everybody thought it was chicken, and I was going around saying, you know what you're eating? You're eating frog legs. But that was before that was a popular dish, by the way. So anyway, what happened to me stood with me. It really directed my life. Although I couldn't articulate it as an 8-year-old, what I sensed from that moment was that something extraordinary had happened. And it happened because everybody came together, college students, high school students, professors, just ordinary people, all came together, soldiers from Fort Bragg, all came together to stand up for something that, again, it was bigger than I had a framework or context to hold it in, but I knew the world had changed in that moment. And that became for me my entree into a journey of discovery, which I would call my life. So from that point, treasuring the stories that came out of that movement, and also the fact that in '72, my parents were exhausted and decided to move to the Caribbean. So I got to grow up for the next few years in the Caribbean and had that experience. Now here we are, community of the familiar, moving into a community of unfamiliar, still in middle school, going into high school, begins to shape and morph my sense of community to be perhaps something more liquid than how it all started out. And from there, going on to college and beyond, I began to have this sense of wanting to discover, who am I? I think that's a question around that age we are all tempted to answer. And who am I, not only as an individual, but who am I not bringing into my circle because I don't know they're there. And that's when I began, I left my career as a dean and decided that it was time for me to walk my talk. So I started an ancestral journey from Pennsylvania to Georgia, and then to walk backwards the routes of the Underground Railroad and the Trail of Tears. And then from there over to Africa to do healing work and reconciliation prayers throughout the dungeons, slave dungeons, and walking from the forest to the doors of no return. And then when I got back, decided, okay, now armed with all of that, and when I say armed, I mean the nature energy, the ancestral energy, the historical context. If I really believed in peace, was I willing to walk the talk? And
Sure.
so stepped out in 2000 on a journey, on 2002, on a journey to walk around the world to be a demonstration of peace. I had my mom, who was in the final stages of Alzheimer's, in a wheelchair, my partner Karen, and the rest of our crew. And we had about enough money to make it about 2 weeks on our own. So our whole journey, our currency was faith. And with that, that made it very clear that our only way we would accomplish this was in community. That would be our currency was faith led us to the right community at the right time, and what was to unfold, unfolded. So I'll stop there. There have been lots of walks since then. I spent 17 years of walking across the country in different places and traveling with Indigenous elders. And where I am right now is that I realize that I can't see myself in totally as an individual anymore. That I think of myself as, when I spoke of that dark center core, that inner core, the red heart glowing, I kind of think that there's a symbiotic relationship to all of life that joins us and connects us in our heart. So I really do believe that, you know, I am who I am, and I am just another you. So thank you.
Shay.
Thanks, Audrey. So I'm gonna share a little bit of myself for those of you who joined us in previous webinars. This is going to be a little bit of a different journey here. I got to grow up community. My first community was extended. My aunties and my uncles and my grandparents. My grandparents, Jay and Jeannie Wallace, lived in Hemet, California, and were pillars of that community as the lone veterinarian and his wife. And you know, it was an amazing model for me to have cousins, to have extended family, to have that unconditional love and adventure as a kid. And my first real claimed community was a group of swimmers in Las Vegas, Nevada, who lived all over the valley. We came together and swam as preteens and teenagers twice a day. We got up before school. We got up at like 5 a.m. to do this crazy thing that brought us together, which is a reminder to me as I fast forward to what I've seen this community and what I do see community doing, the dedication when those values are aligned. And from there, I found a similar community at college, a group of water polo players at Claremont McKenna College. But I would say the big, deep kind of push from what maybe more of a physical or social community to a spiritual community came when I moved to Santa Barbara and discovered wilderness mentoring for at-risk youth at a place called Wilderness Youth Project, which is part of the Sister School Wilderness Awareness, or separate but similar philosophies of connect kids by taking their shoes off and immersing them, not teaching them about nature, like actually playing that thing. And that community taught me about permaculture, which dovetailed into a rites of passage. I knew a man in Santa Barbara that was doing traditional Lakota sweat lodges. I was convinced and persuaded to do a very difficult traditional rites of passage. And after that, I found an ayahuasca community in Santa Barbara, traveled down to Peru after a few years of doing ceremony, and did a 10-day dieta where I really lost my marbles. I came out the other side with 4 days of no sleep. Our admixture on the dieta was part of the Datura family, Chiricsanango. So I was in a deliriant, kind of altered state for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I thank that community repeatedly for bringing me home and for informing this work that has become, me finding this community called Zendo Project and supporting other people through their own psychedelic crisis. And I think through all of this, this extended community of maps of Zendo Project, of this game that we play. I also want to acknowledge that there's a part of me, and I see this tendency in the shadow of a lot of people I know as well, to isolate. And maybe even just to take a slight step back, one of the other powerful groups that I found in Santa Barbara was a men's community by the name of the Mankind Project. And 2 men that, Dave Thomason and Anthony Johnson. And I'd like to acknowledge Anthony especially because he is the connection that brought Audrey Scott Williams to this conversation. And those 2 men showed me, modeled to me what it was to be a healthy masculine. And that got me into this men's work, which got me into rites of passage, which is, I think, this bigger thing around community and accountability that we're going to be diving into today. So, yeah, to look at it a little bit from this place of, what are we watering? What are we feeding? What are we growing? Oh boy, yeah, these slides. Hang on. This is my back pedal really quick for this this community, acknowledging the other big community that we've found with Sendo Project is the Burning Man community. So what we have here, and if we can paste some of these into our chat, the 10 principles of Burning Man, as well as I believe it's Wickham that did these amazing symbols, and we adopted these into our wheel. You can read more about them on the Burning Man webpage. And then the Zendo Project. And really, again, what started as psychedelic support and psychedelic peer support, to me, has become a bigger community of just support. We've seen as the years have gone on at Zendo Project, we used to see 80 or 90% of our guests come in who are on substances. And these days it's about a 50-50 mix. So we're just seeing folks that are having a hard time with life. And I think this idea of peer support is really at the core of community. Safe space, sitting, not guiding, talking to somebody through their experience rather than down, and where appropriate, reframing bad as difficult or challenging. So that brings us to here and now with all of you, and through our diverse walks of life, having this conversation about what is community? How has it been defined in our life? How would we like to define it going forward? What are the influences and impacts of governance, religion, and nature, both on the laws of nature, the laws of man, the things that exist and the things that we deal with? And so, I think in this deep dive that we're going to be taking over the next hour and a half into community, we're going to have some prompts to remind us. And as we get these conversations going deeper and deeper, we encourage you to put some of your questions or insights into the Q&A, and we'll start bringing those Q&As into these sessions rather than saving them for the end. So yeah, I noticed that Audri's taken a step out, and welcome back. I'm curious, Tony or Audri, how you would like to bring some of your insights and wisdom and knowledge into how community has been defined in your life.
I want to actually start by sharing something we talked about in preparing for this talk. And one of the reasons, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure Audrey decided to do this, was we're recognizing that during the times that we're in, all the challenges facing humanity, including COVID, that a lot of people are, as you mentioned, self-isolating and turning to psychedelics and plant medicines as a way of self-medicating. And we recognize that a lot of what people are seeking in that endeavor actually can be handled by just being in healthy community. Right? Yeah, so that is a good launching into a defining of what community is. And for me personally, yeah, what I've looked at over the years, because I'm somebody, again, I mentioned, who is a really enthusiastic advocate for decriminalization of plant medicines and psychedelics in the context of right relationship. And that's because so much of my life transformed and just took off because I discovered these substances. However, in retrospect, what I really discovered was the community, right? And their right relationship use of substances. So I've always focused on psychedelics and plant medicines, in my case, specifically ayahuasca. It's one component of ceremony, and the ceremony is about community, actually, and it models community. And I've often said, without, like, what's the point of the psychedelic work and exploration and growth and with plant medicines if they aren't basically just teaching you how to be a better human being, which means teaching you how to show up in community, basically, right? Yeah, so that's why this particular talk is so important to me personally. You know, I have found, as I mentioned, I think to you, Ryan, that even in the areas of creativity, if you say, you know, well, the one thing I get from psychedelics I don't get from community are these like downloads of information and creative inspirations. And I found even that actually not necessarily to be true. The example I gave you was that every time I've ever had, you know, a creative project that I thought was complete, and then I go to share that project with friends or collaborators, every single time the project shifts and new brilliant insights and ideas come forth that, you know, are absolutely equivalent and on par to some of the inspirations I got from a psychedelic or plant medicine journey. So I still think that we underestimate the power of community in all of its aspects to give us what psychedelics also do, and so beautifully.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, I agree with that, and thank you for bringing that forward. You know, because I've traveled with a lot of elders, I've traveled in so many different places. Being in ceremony has been a very special sort of a awakening for me. And being in ceremony without having, well, first of all, having to lose my own mind, you know, early on in the process, I had to let go of everything I thought I knew. And that's always an ongoing process, and create a level of allowing within me through these ceremonies that awakened me through a different lens, you know, in sort of the more way we've grown up in the Western world, or I grew up in the Western world, college, universities, and all of that, and how we're taught to think. I had to unravel and enter into community and into ceremony in a space sort of like that infant that I talked about, the very beginning of who we are, and begin to put the pieces together in a different way that incorporates music, sound, smells, plant medicine, the nature itself and all of its aspects and dimensions, and be able to accept that as just as real as a more scientific Western paradigm of the world. And through that, I began to recognize even within myself that multi-dimensional aspect of the I. And the more I became aware of that, the more I became aware of, as I talk about community, it is a communing with, and community can be in so many places. It can be in nature, when I recognize that the trees and all of nature is just as much a part, they're beings just as I am. So I can be in that space. I can hear the sounds, the language. I can take in the light and the colors that the light creates or negates. So for me, when we get beyond sort of a paradigm that's more modern, that influences our community, and go back and discover ourselves in our ancestral context, those spiritual practices that are still available, some may not be because of different influences, but when we are able to tap into that, something that is primal in the sense that it is that connecting tissue that awakens us to the truth of who we are. And so I agree with you, Tony. We need to make sure that plant-based medicines are made legal. And legal in the context. And see, that's sometimes where the discrepancy comes, in the context of their use. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. But when I say context of use, there's a very different experience of experiencing the use of plant-based medicines in ceremony with the elders chanting, and it's surrounded by people who understand what is happening and who can chant you in and out of whatever experiences you're having, versus experimentation, which happens on every level. But when you have that community around you, it allows you to open up in ways that I haven't found another way that opens up to that extent.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much. I just saw an article this morning, it's probably from this week sometime, New York Times by Michael Pollan. But the thing that struck me was the title of the article was, "How do we do drugs now?" Right? And he's speaking exactly what you're speaking about. When I am sharing publicly that I am an advocate for decriminalization of plant medicines, I choose that word very carefully, right? Because we're talking about right relationship, hearkening to what you're just sharing, Audrey. I am not interested, and I think this is why I think decriminalization is powerful as opposed to legalization, which ultimately is what we want, because we've gone so long in the West without right relationship with plant medicines and psychedelics that most people don't know how to use them in a proper context, right? So to suddenly make them legal, ubiquitous everywhere, probably isn't so smart.
Yeah.
But I think in a relatively quick period of time, yes, there can be, which is what MAPS is about. We introduce first maybe the therapeutic and medicinal aspects of it. Very quickly, people realize, in a lot of ways, even more powerful than that is community ceremony use with plant medicines as a center, but not as the sole focus, right? Yeah, and how that begins to expand our consciousness and our circle of what is community, since we're in this section of defining it. As Audrey was hinting to, that's so profound. I had no idea when I started this journey that I would quite literally see plants and animals and rocks as part of community, right? Yeah. That I would be able to look out into the stars and have a sense of community. Those aren't abstract terms that kind of come out of a new age movement. That's a returning to home.
Yeah.
And if I may, I think one of the bits that I'm hearing you both talk about is there's a bit of safety in community that maybe we don't find elsewhere. And in the experience that we've seen, both me personally as well as our greater Zendo project community, that folks often come to us, in this relationship of strangers. We don't know them, they don't know us, but they're not feeling at home, or they're not feeling safe with maybe the people that they've come to Burning Man or another festival with. And they're being kind of, whether it's ostracized or just not feeling that comfort of having the thing come up that they need. And I think that's a bit that we're all finding in our own ways. What does that safety look like, not only in the psychedelic space, but even just the permission to grieve, to feel? I think back to some of my earlier communities where I was made fun of, or people around me, including me. I was that bully at time, because that's how we did it. We were like, oh, look at you with your sensitive little feelings, And as I got older, I was like, wow, what a disservice. Like, it's still something that when I'm up at night and I can't fall asleep, breaks my heart. And then, I've tried to create those repairs of the people that I, in my adolescence made fun of. And it's really, I think, a rite of passage to not only be able to do these plant medicines, but to be able to access these, ancestral traumas that we have inherited collectively, no matter what race or what side of the line and country we got born onto, or what, generation, that we're collectively as a planet carrying a lot of trauma. And that a safe space, a safe community gives us the option to be able to feel angry without needing to be violent or destructive, to be able to feel sad and move grief without having to be depressed, and to feel happy and joy without it being, just this overly elated, blissful, almost drug state. And I think that that's the interesting journey for me is both some combination of mentorship and multi-generational access to both the elders as well as the new generations, to help dispel some of this programming that I believe did come from trauma as it was passed on to me.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment to several things that you said, Ryan. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge that community is like having a friend. You can have a good friend and a bad friend. So don't think just because you're in community, it's safe space. However, also remember, every experience that we have is helping to make us whole and healthy.
Mhm.
So even in an experience where you may be looking for a community, remember that the plant medicine, the setting of the ceremony, who's there, are all a part of your experience. But the plant medicine isn't the experience. And I think sometimes that's where people get mixed up. The plant medicine is there, just there to bring the ceremony into, just to create a certain access point.
Mhm.
But the real ceremony is the community. But you see, in our Western minds, we think of community as individuals. We don't extend that every being in that, let's say it's a circle that you're having, and every being in that circle is a part of the experience. And that being is you, that being is everyone there, that being is how the light is shining in, that being is, if there's plant medicine, it's the plant medicine. The being is everything. If it's an annoying fly that just keeps landing on your head, that is a member of the community.
Yeah.
And you see, in our Western minds, we sometimes, we're so into separating things that I think that one of the challenges we have now is remembering ourselves as a whole. So I say that because community, the more you engage in community, the larger community begins to be, in dimensions as well as individuals, and everything that shows up is a part of the experience that you're there to have. And we always have the opportunity to live into that moment, or it may be too much. But it's the community, a healthy community, that can take you through it in a good way. And so I just wanted to make sure we acknowledge that the emphasis is on community, because sometimes in circles, everybody's waiting for, if it's a plant-based medicine or whatever, to come out. But that we have to remember, it's the community and what that allows access to. The last thing I wanted to say in regards to what you brought up also, Ryan and Tony, I think you've both spoken to, is that the context of the time that we're in relationship to the conversation that we're having, everything around us is changing except our roots. Except our roots. And so the more we can go back, in the Sankofa way, go back to retrieve what needs to come forward into this moment, so that we can help heal the separation that we've been under for a long time. Is now to remember ourselves as part of the whole, not the whole that has dominion over everything else. And that's a key piece in our own individual growth, and in our growth as community, and as individuals that are here on the earth at this time.
Thank you. Once again, yeah, there's so many times when we are having a conversation like this where something like that is shared. And for me, it's like, thank you everybody for coming. That's it. Because it encapsulates everything, One of the things I've noticed over the years in helping with a lot of post-integration work from psychedelic work and ceremony in general, is that the people that have the most difficult time with integration are people that are having a blown out experience and not going back into community, right? Yeah, that's actually when it's challenging. But people that have really mind expanding experiences that shatter their notions, of reality and who they think they are and all of that in a good way, the ones that don't have community, they're the ones that are calling, looking for support, right? And I realize what they're really calling me about is, I don't have community to land and plant this experience in, right? Yeah, so it's just highlighting just somewhat of what Audri was saying. It's like, the community is already intact, ideally, right? And when you go into a ceremony, you're already in this space of community and all the things that I think a lot of people are going to plant medicines for. And if that's true, your experience is very different, right? It launches, and usually it's all about community and connectivity and how you're showing up, and yeah, morality and values and cosmology, all that shows up. And when it closes, the actual ceremony, you're still in that community, right? Yeah, so those relationships have been enhanced. You get further insight into how to show up. And what a lot of Western people get, I've seen over the years, particularly in the last couple, their main takeaway from their first ayahuasca experience, in my case, has always been a sense of community they never knew existed, or a need for it. Or they suddenly have this sense of like, you know, oh, I guess I had an intellectual concept of interconnectivity, but now I'm really getting it. Like I really am connected to everything. Yeah. And that's short-lived if you don't have a community to go back in and start to practice that, or have it maybe be a lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I think that really hits this heart here, right? Of community as medicine. And I think that's a conversation that we've had more over this last year of COVID, especially, but something that my mentors have taught me for a long time is that you can have these big experiences, whether they're rites of passage or therapy, independent of psychedelics or any of these things. But at the end of the day, if we don't have community to help us integrate, then it's just an experience. And, you know, it's just something that was, you know, fun and beautiful and maybe insightful. But I believe that the bigger thing is not being able to go to, you know, how many ayahuasca ceremonies can you do in a year, but rather how many integrative conversations can you have from one ayahuasca ceremony? You know, how much
Yeah, you know,
can you integrate?
just as a funny like anecdote, I remember many years ago, we were in an orientation for a ayahuasca ceremony, and there's a guy sitting there. He wasn't the one leading it, and he turned to us and he said, "I've done over 600 ayahuasca ceremonies." Right? And the person next to me said, "And what's amazing is he's still an asshole." And what I loved about that, as because I was in the early stages of my journey with this, I later realized like the profundity of that statement and the statement that the friend made. You know, it's like it's not just about 600 journeys, drinking gallons and gallons of a plant medicine, and getting blown out. Right? It's like if you're still an asshole, something's not working. Right? Right. Meaning, like, how are you showing up again for other people? Like, how is it making you a better human being, which only shows up in the context of community? Yeah.
You know, there was a question in the chat about can you have the experience in being in ceremony and not actually taking the plant medicine? And I just wanted to share an experience. We were walking across the country, and we were with our Native family community and invited into a ceremony of plant medicine. And as walkers, and because we have a lot of walking to do the next day, we did not participate in the plant medicine. However, we were there for the whole 12 hours in ceremony. And we were
as, you know, as filled as anyone. We shared the experiences that were there. We had it all integrated into our system. And so we walked out of there feeling just, you know, I guess the word I would use is just in another space, in another zone. We were elevated through that experience. I've been in lots of experience, but some of the walkers had not ever been in an experience, but they were able to sit there the 12 hours and participate. The healing happened on so many levels for so many people. So I just wanted to make sure that we hadn't really talked about that part, but I wanted to make sure for the person that asked the question that yes, indeed, it is the community that ends up shaping the experiences. It is whatever elements are brought into the community that can help you have a greater experience or a deeper experience. I also wanted to just share one other thing, and Tony and Ryan, you might both laugh at me on this. I want, for those who are entering this opportunity to find community through ceremony, don't always expect it to be your first experience to be the most amazing thing that's ever happened. For me, and even though I wasn't doing plant-based medicine when at all in this ceremony, I was in a very powerful ceremony that awakened me to so much that I really was not prepared for. And I remember telling my elder, I said, I don't think I can do this. I need to back out. I don't know that I can follow this path of ceremony and in my life right now. And he says, my dear, it takes a mad woman to do this work. So, so I just wanted to put that out there for those who feel so strongly that they're being led down different avenues, especially at a time. I always think of everything in context to what's happening now in the world around us. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to grow by leaps and bounds, taking in the fullness of who we are and bringing that as our offering to ceremony and to everything that we do. I try to do that with my children. I have 3 sons and 17 grandchildren. So, always being mindful that.
So you are a mad woman.
I am a mad woman. but being mindful of the footsteps that we're leaving behind. And Ryan, yes, you're probably the younger of the 3 of us. I'm not sure, I may be, but I think you might be. We're all at whatever stage that we're at, we are walking each other to the next dimension, to the next step, into love, into the heart, in and out of community, until we finally realize that we are the community, and every experience that we have, we're building community. And in this time when it looks so negative with climate change and everything that's happening, I tend to think through so many of the ceremony experiences I've had and opportunities with the elders, that what we're really seeing is the earth is just simply righting herself.
Amen.
And we're along for the ride. And for those of us who are tuned in, we get to be helpers in that process. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it does mean that we're moving in a trajectory of correction.
I like that.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. I love that so much, because it highlights, this is wisdom that is born not only from psychedelic and plant medicine work, because it comes up a lot in ayahuasca work, but just from, again, in the context of being in healthy community. Right? If you're in right relation, well, one of the things I've shared a couple of times is, if you're in right relation with plant medicines, you're in right relation with life, because they're quite literally are teaching you, everything about discipline, that you're connected to everything, how to be in balance, all those things, and I look out at the world at the moment, and I think it's so ironically beautiful and serendipitous. They're right at the time when it seems like the tragic culmination of an idea of separation, which I think is a time period that we're in, right at this time where we seem to have lost our sense of community and separation with the cosmos, here comes something like ayahuasca, right? That is like literally the planet Gaia, the cosmos, speaking to you directly, right? And shifting us back, right, to wholeness and balance and center. And reminding us of the value of being in community, right? But Audri spoke to earlier, in the more cosmic sense of it, I think it shows up in how we treat each other, certainly, but it's pointing beyond that, right? Yeah. And it's saying, like, you are everything, quite literally, that you're looking at, right? And as a lot of elders just said, it's like maybe Chief Seattle, I'm not sure. Yeah, what you do to the earth, you do to yourself. And there's a reason that's almost cliche at this point, because it's true, right? Yeah. In a much deeper somatic kind of sense that I think most of us have thought it to be true. And it is beautiful also that even science, quantum physics, is starting to say the exact same thing. It's like, the reality that you're looking at is an illusion, right? Everything that you're looking at is actually you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Tony that brings up for me this idea of you as the other and vice versa, right? Talking about seeing it a little bit in the chat and in some of these questions. So I'd like to take it in this direction if you two are willing to
Please.
have this part of the conversation with me. The idea of integration, and as some of the shadow and men's work has been taught to me, whether we're looking at it as community outside of ourselves or the parts of ourselves, in internal family systems and Gestalt work of there's this part of me, right? There's this part of me that wants to do nothing but eat ice cream and play video games all day. But like, that's not what I came here for. And I need community to remind me to not go too far down the Netflix, ice cream, not taking care of myself road. But then on the other side there, I believe we all have within us, the thief and trickster, the killer, these archetypes that if unchecked, if unconscious, can really wreak havoc in our life. But as soon as we acknowledge that that's a part inside of me, that let's say the thief is willing to go and steal food for the community or the family in times of famine, if I can make relationship with that part of myself and actually not make it the person or the part of me that's going to steal everything, but rather the trickster or the part that is aware of the thieving that happens in the world, perhaps he's got more of a keen eye and can be having different conversations. And I think that's the bigger piece that I'm seeing so many curious questions about of both how do we find the community, but then how do we feel safe in community? And I'd be curious, I've heard this concept recently in the last year of uh, compassionate, intentional non-inclusion. I know that's a mouthful, but it's like the idea of a boundary, right? Of like, yes, we want to have community, but we also want to have different boundaries of who do we let into our front yard versus who are we willing to meet out in the public park? Then who's allowed inside of our doorway? Who's allowed in our kitchen versus even who are we allowing to like sleep in our rooms, our guest rooms, our bedrooms. And I think that discernment we're making all the time and we often don't talk about it. And there's this, I think, beautiful opportunity in this day and age around safety and asking for safety that doesn't have to be exclusive, but can also be a really powerful reflection to how somebody's behavior is impacting us. Or again, to make it independent of the person, right? To say, hey, this behavior doesn't feel safe to me. Or
You're bringing up something really important, and I'm so curious to hear what Audrey has to share on this. But this idea of community in the past wasn't optional, right? You were born into a tribe or a particular neighborhood, and you weren't particularly mobile, and that was it. You had to make it work, right? And you were forced to solve conflicts or basically not survive, right? And now we're in this whole different place where your community is really largely for a lot of us by choice. It certainly is for me, right? I absolutely am choosing who I'm quote unquote in community with. And I am one of those people that lives in a neighborhood that I've been in now for 8 years. And I know of all my neighbors, I know 3 of them by name, right? And I'm not hanging out with them either. We just get along really well, right? So my community is not in any way, shape, or form being defined by proximity, right? It's being defined by shared values and interest, and the boundary of who I want to be in community with, right? But then I'm always reminded on a regular basis with my ceremony work that I probably should be more in community with the people that I am sharing physical space with in my neighborhood, right? So I'm in this dance like everybody else about our original topics, like defining community and what is it. I have a very now broad relationship to that term community that keeps me whole and sustained, right? And I get actually pretty down on myself when I have a sense of separation from somebody that lives across the street.
Yeah. This is a very important area of our conversation. Thank you, Ryan and Tony. Community, wow, how do I even begin? we have in in a modern context, we define everything down to its most minute understanding or sense of a word or concept. And what we're ending up doing is dividing and dividing and dividing to the point that then we forget what was the reality around
the original origin of what we were looking at.
Mhm.
And I find that in community. I find that in communities on a large scale where there's been so much chatter
Mhm.
that it's cut off lines of communication, especially from the heart. And we've sort of accepted that as norm. But the time that we're in right now with climate change, earth changes, with pandemics and so many things, hatred, racism, what is happening is we're having to really go back and rethink some of these boundaries that we've established around, I guess, protecting ourselves in different environments and different situations. So I'm saying that to say this, and you're making me stretch here a little bit. I'm saying that to say that in the ceremonies with some of the oldest people on the planet, I'm thinking particularly about the Sands Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert. You know, nobody was filtered out of the experience. Nobody was told they had to be in the experience, but the experience of an evening ceremony brought everyone together, bringing whatever they had to offer into this experience, whether it was food, water, whether it was some beads, whatever it was, music, dance. And there was no sense of anything that shouldn't be there, even when we had these giant scorpions chase us out of the circle for a minute. But the point I wanted to make is this. Every experience we have is an experience that takes us to the next step.
Mhm.
Often in our culture, because we're so separated from nature, from ceremony in its original context, it's often demonized. All these separations, I think that's what causes the separation anxiety that we experience. In many of the old in the ceremonies with the elders, one of the things that we learned is that you don't close the door to anybody. You begin to learn as you're fortifying yourself that everyone's coming in. Maybe they're coming in as coyote, you know, maybe they're coming in acting a fool. But that's the role that they are to play in the community, because somebody's taking things too seriously. You know, somebody's not honoring the boundaries, so that every experience and the community isn't just the ceremony. And that's what we have to remember. The ceremony helps community to grow and to evolve. So it's an ongoing process. And when we engage in that way and we find a loving space to enter into, to absorb even our own crap that comes up in ceremony, it's a wonderful place to really have to look at ourselves and decide what we take out. I'll never forget coming out of a teepee in a ceremony that we had done. We came out, and when we were not warned, but told by the person who was doing the ceremony, when you leave here, remember, you're walking across the threshold. You're leaving the womb. Don't take all that stuff with you. Take the good, you know, take the good. So I say that, and the last thing I wanted to just say as well is that sometimes our addiction to our dysfunction is the thing that we least want to deal with. And in ceremony, it will come up. And it will play out in all kinds of ways, and we'll find everybody to blame. But sometimes our stuff smells, and we've got to deal with it. Okay. Now,
Yep.
Amen.
so we're all there together. We're all in it together, as we are in this global ceremony that we're having right now. The choice is always us. What are we going to do with the experience? What of the head and what of the heart? And many of my elders say now the journey now is from the head to the heart, because this is separation and this is community.
Wholeness, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So,
well, you've done it again, Audri. You know, every time you speak, I want to just sit and have a moment of silence, right? Just to contemplate what you share. But this idea of, yeah, global community and the ceremony, well, this idea again of the community of sacrament. I have a friend, Dan Miller-Smith, he's in the chat there. And I was sharing with him yesterday, this feeling I'm having, or experience I'm having right now, which anybody that does the work that I do know it comes 2 or 3 times a year, where you're suddenly being demonized and there's like this witch hunt, right? And this is all around this concept of a few people creating kind of a Me Too movement around, quote unquote, not feeling welcomed by me in ceremony, right? And so my first thought on that is, thank you, because it's in community that I grow, and you can bet from this point on, I'm going to be more welcoming than I ever have, right? And at the same time, what I couldn't get, the fascinating thing is none of the 3 or 4 people who made this assertion would agree to have conversation with me about it, right? It was like a hit and run. I just want you to know that several times I felt unwelcome. And I said, hey, I'm more than welcome to have a conversation with you about that. Would you like to call me? Like, nothing, right? And the reason why I bring that up is, you know, clearly they're having some issues around not feeling welcome. They made other kind of statements that alluded to that. And the only place where that was going to get healed or confronted was post-ceremony, right? It's the same thing. It was like, let's have a conversation. That's what the ceremony was for, to bring up these things, as Audrey just brought up. And now our possibility is to enter dialogue about it and have a healing that we can be a win-win. You know, if I'm showing up in a certain way, I'm more than welcome and open to looking at it, right? For me, that's the whole point, right? And Dante wrote over here, like, you know, his favorite part, it says, nothing quite compares to sharing circle after ceremony. Hallelujah, right? We all know that our favorite part of the ceremony experience, again, highlighting what Audrey was saying earlier, it wasn't the plant medicine encounter, right? It wasn't the psychedelic work. It was the shared experience of being there together. And my favorite part of any kind of plant medicine work is always the sharing circle, right? Yeah, it's really because what's really happening there is we're bonding and sharing and expanding community. And we're putting into context why the point of having a ceremony at all, right? Yeah, so I just loved everything you shared, Audrey, and how that translates into global community at this moment in history. That's our task.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have all the answers for it, but I know certainly as I'm looking at social media over the last year, you know, this cancel culture, as it's being called, you know, this new form, and I spoke to both of you yesterday about this distorted form of tribalism, right? And demonizing what that term is about, you know, is something we can probably talk about next. You know, we have to evolve the idea and actually get back to tribalism, not in the ways that it's been distorted and warped, but in this idea that I'm connected to you and my existence is dependent on you, right? To some degree. That idea of tribalism is really valuable. What we're seeing now is tribalism as divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Audrey, I want to ask you about that, because you spoke to this when we were just chatting the last couple of days, that's a weighted term at this point, tribalism.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it gets caught up in our language. It's sort of the cultural norm. I often phrase it as a Western paradigm, because it's been such a paradigm of separation and developing hierarchies around
separation in so many ways. But I think that, and so it gives tribal communities a negative connotation, as I said before, a lot of demonization and primitive references and so forth. And I tell you, we have a lot to learn from many of our tribal communities. And a lot of sometimes the dysfunction that you see is the weight of the discordant energy between what is inherently the truth that they've lived by. When I was out on the Kalahari, the DNA of the Sans Bushmen goes back 80,000 years. Think about that. Okay, I think I'm doing good to be able to go back 3 generations, but 80,000 years. And no matter what they've been through, and believe me, they've been through a lot, they are still here. So there is something that is uniquely valuable, so valuable that it could literally be what saves us. I honestly believe that if we don't have to be better than anybody else. We don't have to be the best. We don't have to be the richest. We don't have to have more stuff. We don't have to embrace, this whole idea of us as sort of our sort of demigods in a way. We just have to be.
Yes.
And when we allow ourselves to be in that space of just being, then the thoughts that we have guide us to right action. They guide us to the sense that there is nothing in this world that we're not connected to. I mean, imagine, just think of all of us, even all of us on the call here, who will hear the call. If we think of ourselves as an aspen tree, so that all of us, all over the world, there's some level of connection at our deepest roots.
Mm-hmm.
And we can stop fighting that battle of having to be the best, be all this other stuff, when the truth is we can learn to be. And in that space sprouts all the imagination, all the creativity, all the love, the healing that we are now. That becomes the gold. And the gold, G-O-L-D.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gold that we need right now, in my opinion. Okay, in my journey, that's where I've come to. So when we talk about tribalism, I get concerned sometimes how that word is used. But in the purest sense, the tribe is the community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that community is there for each other, holds the container for whatever experience we need to have, in and out of time, and helps us move through it, knowing it to me and recognizing that life is beyond this individual experience we're having right now. We're so focused here, we think that's it. But there's so much that's gone before and so much that'll come after. And yet we're still a part of all of those stories too.
Yeah, that idea of 7 generations, I feel, is so lacking in, I don't know if it's lacking in the West in general, but it certainly seems to be lacking in the West in contemporary culture. This extraction, resource economy and materialism and bling bling, and everything is about me and mine and my tribe in the, I think, limited sense, my, very close, familiar set of friends, maybe, or my besties is a term I keep hearing now, that we can just live for the gratification, instant gratification of this moment, and not have that be in context of our ancestry forward and backwards. It's crazy, right? And I think it's at the heart of the pathology that's running through, I'll just say our culture, because it's the one I'm most familiar with. Yeah.
Well, and one of the beautiful things that I first heard in our conversation, Audri, was this greeting of what we kind of determine as maybe a healthier community that's looking forward and looking back from ancestry to the next 7 generations. And I believe the way that you shared it with me was the greeting was something to the like, how are the children?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
a Maasai greeting isn't
Mhm.
hello, how are you? It's how are the children?
How are the children? Yeah.
That's so beautiful, because it's immediately acknowledging that the health that they're speaking about, how are you, has to do with your wholeness, right?
Yeah.
And the community that you live in. I love that. It makes me teary-eyed, to be honest.
Yeah. And so that, you know, it brings me to this thing, you know, and I just want to kind of briefly hit, we've been talking about this, but Susie had asked, like, you know, how do we safeguard against joining an unsafe community? In other words, what advice would you give to individuals seeking safe communities only? And, you know, it kind of brings me to this thing of like, in hearing this, is there really any such thing as only a safe community, right? Like knowing that there are all of those aspects, we're trying to do our best thing, and that often we unite around values, and maybe we unite around things we're threatened by. But you know, I just want to acknowledge, like, there's a lot of my family and friends that I grew up with that are big into sports ball, and I could give a, I just don't care about it. It doesn't pull me in, but they're still part of my community. We just don't value, we don't have that overlapping value. But there are other overlapping values that we have. And I get curious, you know, I think we've talked quite a bit about this, of like the overlap of that. But I think maybe what I'd like to share from my own experiential in the Zendo community was once a trust was broken between me and a really dear colleague and staff member of like, hey, I got to go do this thing for myself. Can you do this other thing while I'm gone? And coming back after 8 hours, I found out this thing wasn't completed. And I had this moment, this very adolescent, very childish part of me that was like, forget it. I'm done with this person. I'm done with this community. They made a mistake and let me down. And thankfully, one of my elders, and you know, about maybe more one of my peers, but conducts herself as an elder, was able to sit with me and say, "Hey, let's go have this conversation right now." And the trust that was repaired, and me just expressing the impact, and then hearing where this person was, our love, our connection is stronger because we were able to break trust. And I just look at those places in my life, and you know how popular that is a thing in this cancel culture of like somebody misstepped, forget about it. And I get that there's, you know, we need to find that balance, but I just want to acknowledge for me that that shadowy part of myself that is sometimes ready to step out of a thing when it doesn't go exactly as I want. And I get curious how we get to find that safety first in ourselves, right? Sometimes we're just not feeling safe no matter who's around us. And maybe there's nothing a community can really do to fix that. That's part of our own work. It helps to have a safe community. But I just think, you know, this is almost its own 3 or 4 hour conversation of what do we need to feel safe? What is safe community? But I just want to remind us all that sometimes it does take feeling unsafe, being able to speak up about that and repair it to allow somebody, like you were saying, Tony, like, hey, if I'm being unwelcoming, thank you for letting me know I'm being unwelcoming. Can we have a conversation so I can better know what I did, how it happened, and I can have the context to repair it? And I really just want to applaud the folks that are willing to step forward and have those hard conversations because they're not always easy, but I believe it's what builds a safer community.
Yeah, Audrey hinted at this earlier, not assuming that your ceremony was going to automatically be a safe space or a safe community. However, but in the idea of forging one and cultivating it, it comes from exactly what you're talking about. It's actually in the breakdowns in the community that the safety is formed. Because what you're setting up, at least for me, and how I've been cultivating that to the degree that I can in my community, I always say, you know, the difference of opinions, the confrontations, all of that is secondary to how we move through it, you know? So the safety comes from, hey, I want you to know that I feel really put off by you, or unwelcomed in this case, you know, and can we have a conversation about it? Yes, okay? That's safety to me. It's, I don't think your safety comes from this idea that no confrontation or bad moment may never happen. The safety to me comes from, I can show up here, right? And I'm valued here. And it's okay not only if I make a mistake and drop the ball, it's also okay to call you out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's an important part of ceremony, you know, being open to allow the experience. I do want to speak to the other side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things is trusting when we open ourselves up, we are clear about our own individual intention,
Mm.
and then own it. Because really, when I've been in situations where I was asked to attend ceremony, and I had a sort of an intuition or a gut feeling that that just wasn't something meant for me to do. And then I have to sometimes say, no, I can't. And, or I'll say, thank you, but I'm not able to join you at this time, or whatever words come up, because it's about trusting also ourselves. And I think that's about, community is also about us being responsible for ourselves. And sometimes we may not be clear on that. And what I always say to everybody before we start a ceremony is, what is your gut telling you? What is your intuition telling you? If it's telling you that you're in the right place and this is for you, then you're meant to be here. If you are feeling anxiety and you feel that you're in the wrong place, then you make your choice. What is it that you are choosing? What experience are you choosing to have? And I think that is so important, that we are given permission within ourselves. We give ourselves permission when we feel that something's not right and this isn't the place, to walk away. And it's okay. It's okay. Because once you enter into an experience and you already feel it, in your gut, it's not where you need to be, and then you have a negative experience, that creates a whole nother level of healing that has to happen. And maybe that's what's meant to be. Maybe it has to crack the shell to go deeper,
Yeah.
And then when you've had a negative experience, as both of you said, speak to the leader. Say, this wasn't the best experience for me, and this is why. But don't go whining. I sometimes in ceremony, there are people who are hungry for attention.
Yes.
Ceremonial leaders, and they will drain the energy. And I'll tell you, can I share just a quick story?
Oh, please.
Please.
We were in ceremony with the Maori from New Zealand, and they treated my mom as something special, as many cultures did when we traveled. Even though she was non-auditory, they would have her with them when they did healing. And they were doing healing on this lady, and they knew the healing was complete, but the lady wouldn't get up. She wanted more and more and more. And so they turned to my mother. Now, my mother doesn't talk much, right? I turned to my mother and said, Natalie, what should we do? Or mother Natalie, what should we do? And she says, throw water on her. And that was it. So they went and got a glass of water and they threw it on the lady, and she got up, and that was it. So what I'm saying is, recognize in you, all of you that shows up, so that if you're calling forward a drain of energy because you're feeling you need it all, then check yourself. If you're in a situation where something doesn't look right, you call it out. And to me, that means we take responsibility for our experience to the best that we can, and trust our intuition to know whether it's something we're to be a part of or not.
Thank you.
I'm always interested, Audri, in how we scale that up to, let's say in this context, we find ourselves in country. And I'm thinking specifically about, a lot of people had the experience I'm about to share, which is that a very solid community that my community members all thought we were a part of and felt really good about, completely imploded relative to conspiracy theories, politics, Trumpism, and COVID. And it's still continuing. Right. And every time we kind of regroup and now we know who we are, now COVID comes along and there's vax and anti-vax. Right. So it's always, as you brought up earlier, it's always the next thing, right? Of separation. And as we all know, to some degree, that's strategic, right? The divide and conquer. And when I'm looking at people having these conversations online and going back to this idea of tribalism, and then one of the things that the advice is being given to us often is, well, you have to find the common ground, right? You have to find the things that you do share in common. well, that's not working anymore, right? There's a lot of people that have just dug their heels in and, I'm over here on this end of the spectrum. Everything you represent is other and a danger to my identity, right? And I'm very curious about the next steps of, I, I guess I would say the resources that I have shared in the past with younger people about how to bridge those gaps don't work anymore,
Mm.
right?
Right. Conflict has become a different thing with so much that we've seen in the last few years, right? I mean, I even think of, back when I was born, I didn't participate, but just, Vietnam War was like, it was the black and white of like, oh, there's this, you're like, we pull out. But it was never really that simple, compared to say that the war that my grandfather was in, which was World War II, which was like, we got to do this for the good, right? It's a good thing. There's this bad man doing bad things, and we have to come together and unite to overcome. And I think that's the bit recently that has been just such an interesting aspect, is that I don't believe either side is right or wrong. Like that there is this conflict, there's this disagreement. But at the end of the day, where are we aligned and valued in our hearts? And even with this last election, call yourself blue or red, I believe that we actually have closer to an 80% overlap of shared values in this country. And then
Yeah,
yeah,
what you're speaking to speaks to the slide you entered this section with, what do we value and what are we threatened by, right? And that's the central question, I guess, to our conversation about community, at least as it's playing out confrontationally.
mhm.
Yeah, I want to, before Audrey speaks, I want to qualify, I'm very aware for sure that we could take a larger lens that this is just a process of getting to some sense of cohesion, right? I absolutely see that it's healthy that all the conversations, let's just say in America, that have been suppressed up to now, having all those conversations explode and being dealt with is a beautiful thing. And I can, from a larger lens, see that it's part of a continuation in a process. Like, well, at least we're having the conversation, like I do see that. And at the same time, I tend to be these days almost outside of my own personal experience of holding what we kind of call a middle path, constantly listening to both sides, and finding ways to unite harmoniously their different opinions and worldviews. At the same time, I'm not seeing that quite open up yet into a path forward into how we bridge this divide.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, for me,
Thank you both. This is a very important, as we're moving towards I guess we're getting close to bringing up, moving through towards the end of our time together here at this time. I want to just interject a couple of things. I always encourage people to be very sensitive and aware of conversations, because at the core of it all, there's such fear. We're perhaps in the moment in time when it's so much going on that it's very difficult to see how any individual or group can change things fast enough and large enough on a grand enough scale to make sure everybody's okay.
Right.
And so I think that fear gets expressed in whatever way a person feels they have a sense of control for themselves. I'm not going to get vaccinated because whatever. I'm not going to vote for this one, for the blue or the red, for whatever, I was just in a conversation with a friend and she's like, I can't wait for this thing to change. I've got my gun and I want to be able to use it. And I'm like, what? But it's fear. It's fear, and everybody's grasping for some way to try to either defend themselves or to make things better. And so it's good that these conversations are happening. And I think what we have an opportunity, those of us who have been in ceremony and at the center and core of community healing, from all that we've learned, is to hold a container and at the same time to speak into that container the truth as we know it. And ultimately, we're not going to heal what's happening in the world by having these altercations, which are so easily fed by the media. You have to remember there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
And so we just have to we're probably going to revamp some ceremonies, I would think, that take us deeper into our own heart space, that help shore up how we feel about
Yeah, I hope.
ourselves, so that we can be better in the larger community. You know, there are things that we can experience together in ceremony that we can't experience necessarily out of ceremony, but we can take that medicine with us out into the world in which we live and find loving ways to express and be and bring that into that experience. It's going to take time because we're going to have to allow this venting process to sort of the wind to get out of that, because ultimately as things are changing, we're going to have to get more definite about what the actions are, and the actions aren't killing off one another, raping the rainforest and all of that. The actions are going to be, how do we come together, sit in circle and say, okay, for today, what do we need to do? And then we can take that step and then the next step and the next step.
Oh, I love that so much. I was just looking over in the chat, and Anthony Hong wrote, we're having a species maturation process.
Yes.
And my response to that usually is potentially, yes. Well, what I mean by that is the nature, life, the cosmos, however you cognize that, is giving us the opportunity for that, for sure, right? And I don't think it's a given, right? I think there's a call to action involved in that maturation process that, yeah, if you guys want, right now would be a really good time to deal with your shit, right? Collect the shadow. Yeah, like now would be good, right? And all the opportunity and the pressures were, this idea of evolution working by, pressures, right? I think that's exactly what we could be seeing right now, or at least that's a way to cognize it, right? And that's certainly how I do, looking at everything happening on the world stage right now. It's like, yeah, now would be a good time for sure to sit in ceremony and to, which I think is probably our closing topic, like the evolution of what ceremony looks like, which is fascinating because it looks like returning to what our ancestors told us, right? But with a broader understanding now about how that translates into a contemporary consciousness and maybe a contemporary world, that we find ourselves in. It's still ceremony. So yes, Anthony, I think it is a species maturation process, but it's only going to be actually like utilized to its full potential by us creating something that looks like what ceremony has done in the past. Yeah.
And I would even say, I mean, as I experience, as again, and maybe I could have done this earlier in the talk, but owning my white male privilege of, both swimming in this water, taking up too much space, having to have people call me out, or recognizing the, what's going on around me, to be aware of it. Is it like I'm swimming in the water that I'm not aware of until people help me understand that impact. And so from that place of having grown up on television and cartoons and airplanes and freeways, I believe there is an evolution to step beyond cultural appropriation, but to really have this deeper conversation of what is the best of ceremony that works without being extractive, that's still applicable to our DNA, to our hearts, to healing our minds, and actually turning them down a little bit and turning our heart volume up. And, to me, this comes down to a lot of, I guess, rites of passage. I mean, one of the things I've been saying for years, and I think this is the big evolution, is that we have a bunch of adolescents in older men's bodies running our country right now. And I mean that as no specific statement to any politician or leader, but most of our leaders never did a rites of passage. And we, as I was taught it through some of my elders and my teachers, this amazing system of government we have was based on the Iroquois Federation that involved two houses But at the top, it didn't involve a, 2/3. It involved consensus from the grandmother's council. To be on the grandmother's council, you had to be a grandmother, right? You had to have at least 2 generations underneath you and thinking about the 7 generations ahead. And to me, that feels like the collective rites of passage that we want to take as leaders, as of moving beyond this us versus them and seeing this collective we. Because I mean, just from my life, it's easier to just dismiss somebody. It's easier to be in, this conflict of like, I hate that person, or that person's the other, they're separate from me. The real work is building the bridge. The real work is creating and healing. It's unfortunately so easy to wound another person, but what it really takes courage to do is to heal with somebody, to show up with somebody that maybe you don't know their story and you don't know where they've been,
Mhm.
can see that they're holding something heavy, and you could be the catalyst to help them put it down so that they can refill that with something beautiful and more bright and intentional in their life. And I would dare say, and I get curious because I see both of you embodying this. I think that one of the other sicknesses that we're carrying in this country and in this world is just not even knowing our own purpose. There's so many people on this planet that don't know, like, why am I here right now? And I have this deep faith. I wasn't born with it. It came through ceremony and community, that we're all here for a reason, that it's not an accident, that there is a beautiful gift, that every one of us, 8 billion people and humans, are here to share with the world, and only we can do it. And we've defaulted into having jobs and doing these other things so we can get more money or buy the toys. I get curious how we can really model something beautiful again. How we can really uh, share as community these models of human beings living life well, living their purpose, living fulfilled, and living in their hearts. And I ask you two specifically because I see you both doing that so well.
I'm so curious to hear Audrey speak on this, because in the last couple of weeks of us kind of preparing for this, getting to know you and the space that you hold, you know, one of the things I've shared with somebody once was I'm in full acknowledgement that I can't save the world, but I can respond to the person that's in front of me, you know, and in doing so, that's how I can save the world. And I mean it, because it's not a metaphor. It's like, I can't, my actions aren't going to, what I do in the next 5 minutes, maybe in a tangible way, isn't going to have an effect on Afghanistan or Haiti, right? But how I treat people and how that action and how I understand that ripples out into creation in the cosmos does make a difference. So I often say, well, you may not be able to save the world, but you can respond to the people that are placed on your pathway. And for me, that's the community I happen to find myself in. It's even being in this conversation with you all, gathered around, as you and I said yesterday, the campfire of technology, and because the most potent tool I have in my disposal is ceremony and leadership in ceremony. And if that is the most immediate effect I can have, then I'm going to do that with all my heart, right? And show up completely, right? And just trust that all the other me's out there are doing the best they can. And together, it is entirely possible that we'll turn this thing around if it needs to be turned around. Maybe it's like moving forward and we just need to keep it right on course. But that's all I have to say to that. Audrey, I'm very curious to hear.
Well, there are a couple of thoughts that came up as you were talking. One is for me, it's learning to walk the best walk I can, talk the best talk that I can, and love the best that I can. And recognize that everybody that I see on this path, regardless of what that looks like, that they are just trying to do the best they can. They may not have the emotional maturity, they may be so filled with anger. I don't know what their experience is, but they are a human being that needs love. And so the more I go deeper
Or within myself to love myself and all the crevices that, you know, where things hide. And one day you have a thought and it's like, oh no, not more healing. But the deeper I go in my own healing, the more compassionate I find that I'm able to be with others. People aren't going to change, situations aren't going to change until it's time. And usually that's when we reach a certain level of, you know, where we hit that point that change has to happen. It's the only thing that can happen. I think we're at one of those times now, but where we go from here, I think is really based on how we come together inside and with each other. And the more loving and compassionate we are, the quicker we'll get there. I don't care how many guns you have, you're not going to shoot climate change out of the air.
Yep.
You know? So forget the guns aren't going to do it. But it is about how we walk, being mindful of the footsteps that we're leaving behind so that others can follow, as well as making good choices. You know, you're going through the woods, you want to make sure you're being mindful of where your feet are touching the ground. So I say all that to say that in community, we get to experience ourselves in a more illuminated way. And that's a tremendous gift. And then we're not in a space where we can do some ceremony in, you know, on the ground, on the land, and maybe traditional ways. Then we find that ceremony within. We don't stop doing ceremony. We go within and we continue to do ceremony. If it's one person, if it's two, whatever it is, so that we keep fortifying ourselves so that we can make the right choices. And imagine this, if that's contagious, it may take a while for us to reach a tipping point, but you know, this is the age that we're supposed to be ascending into 1,000 years of peace. If that is true, then we are leading the way. So think about that. I'm leading the way into this 1,000 years of peace. And then be mindful of the footprints you're leaving behind. Be mindful of who's following you, who's going to be emanating what you are bringing forward. Is that what you want them to bring forward? Everybody else is going to make the choice. Everybody's going to make the choices they make. We have no control over that, but we do have control over our own heart. You know,
Yeah.
we do have the opportunity to continue to grow. And that's what ceremony brings to us. It's like it's not the tapestry, but it's the needle that it takes to pull all these different cloths together to create that tapestry. So love and compassion, you know, people may say, well, that's so simple when you're talking, you know, that doesn't have any power, but you'd be amazed at the power that has. And I'm not trying to simplify things, but as I said, guns aren't going to work. You're not going to build enough prisons to lock everybody up that thinks different.
And we aren't going to build enough bunkers in New Zealand either.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So it's all on our shoulders. What do we want to do with it? Head to the heart. I think now we've got a journey here.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to stop and drop.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I love it when the conversation comes to a close because somebody lays it down. So I think you better open up questions because I got nothing now.
Yeah, I feel a similar way. I think I will say that we got a few questions in here. They're all really well written and posed, and thank you all for presenting them. I think there's one that I just want to hit up that's kind of maybe going to hit a few of these, just talking about psychedelics and ceremony. I think that maybe we haven't overtly stated it, so I'm going to state it right now because this feels at the core of the conversation that the three of us have been having over the last month. Psychedelics have great potential, but they're not necessarily the answer. I feel community is the answer. Personally, I think psychedelics have helped wake me up and helped open my heart. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that anybody on this planet taking buttloads of ayahuasca or LSD is going to solve the problem. I think it's humanity interacting with humanity that's going to really take us to the next level. So,
Yeah.
you know, just in terms of folks talking a little bit about like everything from sweat to ceremony, my personal take is so many of these ceremonies can and should be experienced sober because they have an amazing opportunity to have mystical and altered experiences without psychedelic drugs in your system. It can become psychedelic just in the experience. So certainly want to encourage that where appropriate. And that being said, I'm curious if between the two of you, I just want to preface, we've got 12 minutes, we can go a little bit over, but is there one that really pulls either of you into a discussion that you'd like to get into in terms of the Q&A that's up? You know, I think, yeah, I'll just say it feels like we kind of hit this one on, yeah, so well, let me just hit this really quick from Fran. Everyone wants community. Paradoxically, it can be hard to show up and actually participate. Resistance, unconscious barriers. What are the keys to dissolving this in ourselves and then supporting others? And again, I think Audri, you really hit that well around just love and compassion. And I'll say from the Zendo project, we're recognizing, you know, put on your air mask, your oxygen mask first before helping that, you know, those next to you. So self-care, more love, more compassion is allowing us, doing our own healing is allowing us to help the others around us heal.
I like Jim S. It says, can you really come into compassionate community with people who you just meet in ceremony or maybe just met in ceremony? Yes and no. Audrey spoke to that beautifully, you know, just because this is, again, it speaks to the power of the community versus the sacrament. Just because there's a group of people sitting in a circle taking a sacrament doesn't necessarily mean they're people that you want to commune with, right? That comes, yes, Jim, you wrote organically, and you can definitely, I think, use the ceremony to get a sense of who you are and how you show up. As Audrey beautifully said, the ceremony can illuminate, right, the truth of people. And I think it can teach us a lot about how we show up in ceremony. And if you're fortunate, you're actually in ceremony with an already established community. And that's one of the things we're talking about, you know, is that the sacrament, whatever it is, can help enhance and grow, and I think expand our consciousness and deepen our connections with community. We can't rely on it to build the community per se, you know. And that's what I found. I've always focused more on the idea of community. You know, we have this term we use a lot in my community that the ceremony begins when the ceremony ends. Like the real ceremony is how we're conducting ourselves. Mm-hmm. And in my case, the ayahuasca is just giving us a glimpse of and possibilities. And as Audrey said, illuminating various things. But, you know, the minute that ceremony ends, that's when it actually starts, right? Wow. Like, how are we walking, right? Wow. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm. No, you're so right. It's that moment you walk across the threshold from the community back into your world, mm-hmm. How you're able to interlace the experience, how you're able to hold on. I always suggest to people when you come out of a ceremony that you don't just rush back into the next thing on your list, that you take, you know, maybe take an evening, maybe a day, and mm-hmm. just kind of be with whatever thoughts, journal whatever's on your mind, or if you're a musician, like my brother Tony, you know, you write something beautiful, think about the symbols and what it all represents. Do something to help you process what your experience is. It's very important to integrate what happened. And so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because, you know, ceremony never ends. You wake up in the morning, you look out in nature, you're in ceremony. Ceremony's in our hearts. And when we get to sit in circle, that's a great privilege to be able to sit in circle together. It doesn't mean every circle is going to be what we want it to be, but it'll be exactly what it's supposed to be. So that's about all I have to say on that.
Yeah. Karen, you asked a question that gets to the heart of what we're talking about, actually. she said, well, you're taking the position you think as being an antagonist, but we're actually speaking to it already. Having attended many, many sweats, how is it that psychedelics make it better, right? Please speak about the rich history of sweats and how they were used in culture and community without psychedelics, and how it yeah, you're basically asking, you know, the core of your question is, are psychedelics necessary? And would they make a difference in something like Sweat Lodge? That's what our whole conversation is about, that,
Yeah.
right? That the psychedelics and plant medicines in and of themselves have a role to play. We're out of right relationship with them, in my opinion, if we're turning to them for all answers and thinking that that will somehow, the word would be, take the place of good community relations. You know, and I don't, again, broadening, right? We're not just talking about community with me and my neighborhood or my friends. I'm talking about community and how I relate to life, right? I mean, you're right, you know, a good sweat lodge is a beautiful technology in and of itself. It doesn't need anything else, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to piggyback on her other question around rites of passage. We've lost the culture of ceremony. Very few cultures use ceremony as rites of passage. Would you consider using the medicine in quotes, as Native Americans did, as insight and rites of passage? So, Karen, not entirely clear if we're talking about the medicine being rites of passage or the medicine referring to more plant medicine like mushrooms or ibogaine or ayahuasca. And again, I understand if we're talking ibogaine, we're getting out of the Americas and going over to Africa. But I'll just say, for my own experience with rites of passage and supporting some young teens through their own, I think that the power of rites of passage without medicine, without substances, is powerful in its own right and doesn't actually require, for I think maybe a lot of those initiations into adulthood from adolescence, any medicine. And in some ways that might actually, I'll just acknowledge for myself, I did a traditional Lakota rites of passage, and I would have much rather sat on the side of a hill for 2 days and done mushrooms than what I went through. And I'm really glad I went through what I went through. But what made it powerful was not only the work that I was doing, but the sweats that were happening outside of my space for the 4 days I was up on the hill, the other prayers, and then coming back into community, having a feast, having a celebration, and knowing that the work that I did wasn't just for myself, but it was for everybody that showed up for me to be accountable for being a better human being, and then asking them. And again, I think this is where I get excited. I would love to see more rites of passage in this world of that accountability of like, hey, I saw this thing that I need to do better in my life, and I want to ask you all as a community, please hold me accountable. I'm going to slip. I'm not always going to do it. And when you remind me, let me just let me know. You don't have to drag my feet over the coals. Just let me know, like, hey,
Or
Ryan.
try to what's that word? To crucify you.
Yeah, you don't have to crucify me. I mean, you can, and I do great as a martyr. I'm trying to move out of that shadow. But this idea of, yeah, and I mean, even that thing of martyrism, I think this has been my big transformation since Rite of Passage. It's easy, like, I've often heard or thought in my head, like, oh, I would die for this cause. I would lay down and sacrifice my life. And the response I often get is, well, that's awesome, but that's not what we want you to do. We want you to live. We want you to, the hard thing to do is live that path, not to die for it, but to actually live through all the hardships that it takes to walk that path. And, again, I still don't know how to do it perfectly, but I do it better because of community. And I watch those who have been through their own rites of passage. I don't know what other way to put it than just grow up. Like, I think it actually gives us the insight to no longer be in that adolescent, like, self-focus, but actually recognize that bigger connection that we are as humanity and how we do impact others with our behavior. And, again, what can we do? What
Well,
can we bring?
you're speaking to that final slide in our series, and I just know I'm just going to speak to this already, but the final culmination kind of our conversation was this, we need to evolve our concept of tribalism to speciesism, and that's where we're at, right? That it's not, yes, your personal journey, your personal work, healing our collective trauma, and what for, you know? I think, and it's kind of my looking at our time here, I think the final thing I would share in this conversation is relative to the topic, the reason why the role that psychedelics and plant medicines are playing in this moment, probably more than they ever have, is that the situation that we find ourselves in is urgent, right? There's a sense of the only way we're going to meet the challenges that we're facing really, as Audrey said, we're not going to shoot our way out of it, and it's not going to be through technology. And clearly it's not happening through government, right? So what that leaves is evolving consciousness. And the beautiful thing about being in community, ceremony, and bringing that together with either psychedelics or plant medicines in the context, again, of ceremony and elders, is that you can have a rapid growth in consciousness quickly that's actually sustainable. You know, not always, we know that, for those of you that are going to attack that. But and as a whole, yes, you know, you can cover a lot of ground in rites of passage and well-conducted ceremony that, as the saying goes on ayahuasca, 10 years can take 10 minutes. Right? and right now we got about 10 minutes in the world, but that's it for me. You know, Audrey, please.
Well, you know, I
I
think
think you both have spoken to so many important parts of that. Community is one of the most valuable things we could have. And even when we don't think we have community, we still have a community, because it may look not like we want it to look, but it still may be a circle in which we find ourselves in repeatedly with the same people, whether they have the same name or not, but the same people keep showing up till we, you know, we get to the point that we've healed that relationship with that energy, whatever it may be. So I don't want to give a sense that, because ceremony is perfect. We've talked a lot about that it is a reflection of who we are and where we are on our path. The greatest gift that I think we have in this process is to get to know ourselves, you know, go deeper. And when you think you've learned it all, go deeper still and go deeper some more. I think our key to moving forward is to cultivate community in everything that we do. It is to not look for a quick fix, because we're beyond quick fixes right now. And, you know, it may be a scary time, and in some aspects it is, but it's also a glorious time to me, because we're going to have to get it.
Yep.
We've run out of options.
Yep.
So there are no options. So we have to dig deeper. We have to love stronger. We have to be more compassionate. We have to integrate ourselves more and more with the world around us. We have to step out of the paradigm that we've been living, especially in the Western world, and that rooted in a colonized mindset. We're going to have to get back to nature and back to being with each other in the most loving and compassionate ways that we can. When we can do that, then we can walk gently on the earth. And I think the earth will respond. It's a process, and it will take time. How much time? It's up to us. Thank you.
Wow.
Shay and I hold to that. I got nothing else, because you nailed it, you know? I mean, I love what you just shared brings the entire conversation full circle in this sense, that speaking to how to walk in life as ceremony.
Yeah.
Wow. What a powerful conversation. Thank you all for staying with us a few minutes extra. And I really feel a full heart here, on the verge of beautiful grief that is what we're doing here. And I remind all of you, I've seen some of it in the chat, there is loneliness, there is hardship. Find love. I know it's not easy, but find the love that feeds that heart of yours. Find your own self-love. Share what you can, where you can. It's some rough times right now, friends, but don't give up. Please keep enduring. I do believe we are all here to see something better, and I believe that we can do it. So Thank you all for the inspiration of showing up here. Audri and Tony, thank you so much. I want more of this. This is what I believe not only this community, but other communities in this planet need right now, are these conversations. So thank you for your life wisdom and experience and insights and bringing it here today. I'm really grateful for not just you, but all of your teachers, your mentors, and even your tormentors who made you who you are today to
Your
stand.
antagonist.
Yes.
Get to hear are we going to have our song?
Yes, so we're going to close it here in a few minutes, but thank you, Audrey. Tony, share a beautiful song.
I thought I'd almost gotten away.
No.
You almost did, actually. I totally blanked. Thank you,
I
Audrey.
just want to thank everybody who's been on the call, and let's just keep weaving this braid together that gives us the answers that we're looking for right now, and have the courage to step into a whole new expression, the possibility of a whole new expression of who we are as that time emerges. So, Ashe, thank you.
Let's see. Got anything else, Ryan?
All you, Tony.
For the moonlight falling, and for all the trees, quite literally, and for this ground beneath our knees, for the memories of love we have known, we can be forever grateful. Forever grateful, yes. Forever grateful, yes. To hear the birds at dawn, they're singing grateful, as I am so very grateful to have lived at all. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Sure.
Audrey. Thank you, ancestors. Thank you, all of the unborn children. Thank you for this planet, all of our guides. Be well, walk well. We'll all see you next time.
Till we meet again.
Love you guys.